Hello, Matt.
Hey Graham, lovely to see you.
Great to see you. Welcome, everyone, to Crazy in Love, the podcast where two therapists talk about all things to do with relationships. Matt, in recent episodes, we've been talking about men and we've been talking about men and sometimes their reluctance to come to therapy and couples therapy because of, I guess, a cliche about therapy that is quite true, that is often about introspection and self-awareness at the expense of anything more practically helpful.
Yeah, concentrates on feelings, that sort of thing. You're
Based on
gonna have you're
feeling.
gonna have to emote and talk about how
Yeah. And
everything
often
works.
the cliche is talking about the past as well, rather than the present,
Sure.
right? And I think that if there's a question for us to answer in tonight's episode, it's how much does this extend to therapy more generally? And if it does, when is self-awareness, introspection helpful? And possibly more importantly, what else can people who are a bit skeptical about those kind of approaches,
Yeah.
what sort of practical techniques or interventions in our kind of work with individuals or couples would they genuinely find
Yeah.
useful in their relationships, especially?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. It came about for me recently as well. I was talking to somebody, as we often do, who's sort of contemplating therapy, and sometimes you'll have a kind of intro conversation just to sort of check for a kind of fit. Some people call those chemistry calls or sort of vibe check or whatever it might be. And this person was saying to me, I don't really want a type of therapy which just keeps asking different forms of a question. So that sounds very. Can you say more about that? Constantly trying to find another angle. That person and so many of the people I see want to find, a solution or an answer. Not that there's one, not that it's true, but something that's useful, or a couple of things they can try, or some guidance, or some indication that some things work better and are worth experimenting with, rather than we go over how you feel and then we talk a bit more about how you feel and then we double check on that and we wonder if there was another layer to that feeling, and under the sadness is that masking an anger, and under the anger is that masking a sadness. And I wouldn't disparage that entirely, but it
Well,
doesn't
it sounds a bit like you are. So
it it doesn't work for that many people that much of the time. And my final comment on this, and then I'll throw back to you,
yeah.
would be what we'd said in our book. And I think some of what sort of prompted the book. But when you look at the survey data, what people say they want from therapies, I
Mm.
think this is from memory, so forgive me if I mangle it, but 75% of people wanted advice and guidance, and about the same number, 75% of therapists are sort of explicitly opposed to doing that. They've trained in a method which is about listening, reflecting back, making space, those sorts of things, rather than guiding people towards anything that would feel like a more practical solution.
So the people who run the schools of therapy where we trained, for example, and other schools where we might have visited for open days and that we know of, they
Yeah.
would say, well, of course, people come to therapy wanting direction and wanting advice, but the answers are within them. They just don't know it yet. They just need
Yeah.
our help and guidance to hear how they're feeling, to help them
Yeah.
have a space to talk about how they feel. And the answers ultimately are within them. And if they come to the likes of you and me, what they're getting is a middle-aged white man's perspective on life rather than finding that truth or their life path within. What
Sure.
what do you say to that counter? What's your
Well,
initial?
I mean, they are getting some version of you and me, aren't they? God help them. But I think what we would say, to be more serious-minded about it, is I would be trying to convey to people what tends to work in the kind of situation they're describing. So somebody who is anxious in a social situation is going to benefit from something different from somebody who is sort of, for example, deeply depressed, or just something about those, something about matching some
Yeah.
tools and techniques to the presenting problem or to the challenge that's being discussed. So rather than they get you or they get me, they get like a bunch of things that tend to work better than other things in that situation. And if we're then talking about a different situation or circumstance, it would be a different sort of set of tools and techniques. So I think that would be
Can we pause on that for a
Yeah,
moment?
yeah, of course.
What people from the outside looking in often think about therapy is they don't understand how it is going to help. So one of the things I try and do in session one or in that intro call is to really help them understand how therapy or couples therapy is going to help them.
Yes.
I don't think an awful lot of therapists do that.
No, that would get called psychoeducation, wouldn't it? Psychoed in the
Yeah.
lingo. And your initial training, no doubt, and certainly mine would have been deeply skeptical that that was a
Yeah.
useful thing to do.
No.
You're
So what?
immediately the objection is you're putting yourself in a position of authority and knowing. And again, back to your point, which I think was well set up, the client, the patient, if you prefer that language, is the expert on themselves and they've got it all in them. It just needs to come out to flourish, that everything is there already. And really all you're doing, if you're anything, you're a midwife, but you're a midwife who is trying to keep hands off and allow nature to run its course.
Yes. Yes.
And I think flatly, I don't know about you, but I don't think that's true for many people with many presenting problems. So I think it's sort of similar to teaching kids to read in school. There is a program of teaching kids to read in school which works way better than anything else. That's why in every school up and down the country, to a greater and lesser extent, they teach phonics in a predictable way using a very specific program, and it doesn't feel very joyful, and it's not yet about the love of reading. That's going to come later, but there is something about, same with maths as well. They need to know their number facts, they need to know their number bonds, they need to know that 6 and 4 make 10 and 8 and 2 do as well, and those sorts of things before they're going to get into puzzling. If you surround kids with those things and suggest that they will engage, very few will, most won't, and some will be completely baffled by the process and won't even understand that they're an environment where they could be learning stuff. And I think it's a bit like that in therapy. I see people, I know you do too, who have had lots of therapy that hasn't worked, lots of therapy that feels like it's spinning the wheels without getting traction, lots of going around the same thing again and again, but not really getting purchase on a problem, not necessarily being challenged. So I would say some of those more active, gets called direct instruction in the world of education. I think there is a place for a more direct instruction, which is going to really jar on the ears of many therapists listening to this.
So, and what rarely got differentiated for me when I was training, I'd be interested in your thoughts, was the difference between instruction or direction or advice from a position of professional knowledge and instructional direction coming from a place of how I would live my life.
Oh, sure, right, yeah, no, that's worth drawing out, isn't it? So definitely not the latter. I mean, my views on how we should tax people and what we should put that towards, and all of those moral questions, I think are by the by.
Or even kind of a couple coming to couples therapy and saying we're wondering whether to have another child.
Sure, I've got very little opinion, huh?
Yeah, wondering whose career to prioritize at
Sure.
what point in their life, or how much money do we want to earn as a couple? All those kind of values-based questions that they're not our purview, right? But if someone is saying we're arguing all the time, we seem to be arguing about these things. If I just threw up my hands and said, well, I think you've got the answers within to know how to stop arguing quite so often. I think I would get slightly frustrated, annoyed looks, I would have thought.
I think so. I mean, I think that's definitely what you hear about. That's what I hear about through through supervising other therapists sometimes, and through contact with other people who do the same job as you and me, that there is a lot of that when you're employing a method of therapy which is more hands off. I was going to say more passive. I'm trying not to use sort of disparaging terms. You might be right. Maybe I am showing my hand too much on this, but methods which are more about curating the conditions and setting the framework for the person to find it within themselves. I think often actually what you get back is it's kind of maddening,
I think if someone's really struggling, this segues to some degree to what people do find practically helpful in therapy. If someone really does start from a place of needing to be guided towards their values, I think that can be enormously helpful, though. That sense of like, you do have the answer within. It's not my place to kind of...
It's nicely put. Yeah. Keep going. I think that's useful.
That it's not my place to help you try and work out what you value in your life and what you're trying to work towards. we might need to create quite a bit of space to help you understand, for example, what values you might have inherited from your family of origin, and what messages you've received about what a good life looks like, and whether you want to challenge any of them. I often find
Yeah,
people
right.
that feel quite depressed and stuck.
Yeah.
It's often because they haven't asked those questions about how they want to live their own life, and they've just followed a path that they think is going to work for them because other people have kind of told them that that's how they should spend their time.
It's a good example. We often, I often seem to end up confessing this. I work with a lot of people who are doing well in the world financially, professionally, and sometimes the question for them is more about, would you leave more money on the table and do fewer hours? Would you be home more? Would you do less travel? Would you not? Would you take yourself off the partner route, or would you step back, or would you retire a bit earlier in order to reconnect with your kids, spend more time at home, save your relationship, those kind of things. So it's a question about sort of who earns and which career we're going after. But often it's a bit of a luxury choice, isn't it? It's a first world thing, but like often somebody is doing very, very well, but it is coming in the way of, and there's a question there. And I think that is where therapy can, invite you to wonder about what the values are and what it is you really want to achieve. So, I mean, I wouldn't take a stance on that in their life. I'd have a stance on that in my own life, what the right work-life balance is for me and for my wife, but in their life, I think it's a really highly relevant question. But I would also pose it. So if they were ignoring it, or it was seeming like it was set in stone and this has to be thus, or the kids have to go to a certain school because mum or dad went there, or it's the best school in the area, I would get involved in, problematizing that and wondering about that and taking them back to maybe something else. So in that sense, I think it would feel more, I think if you saw the tape back, it would look way more directive than a lot of the therapy that I've seen and experienced over the years.
Yeah. Before we pressed record, you were talking about how having some of that space, though, for yourself in your life at various points has been helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I think it depends. I mean, that the stat that we gave earlier, that 75% of people coming into therapy, exiting therapy, say they would have preferred more advice and more guidance. The 25% didn't want that. They don't want that. They want to be listened to. And I think for me, certainly at the point at which I entered therapy, I would have been in my early 20s. I needed somebody who would listen.
Yeah.
And, I know precisely that. I didn't get anybody giving me advice or telling me what to do, or even advising me to read anything or to have a think about anything. It was just a listening exercise while I was telling the story of my growing up and my feelings about that, and trying to understand sort of how I'd ended up where I was in the world. So I think
how do
at
you
that
think
point, sorry, you say.
how do you, I'm doing the therapist thing, right? I'm just asking you questions now.
Well, you interrupted me there as well. It was a big no-no. So, I mean, you've probably failed.
You were just waffling off down a cul-de-sac and I rescued it. For you. What ways was that helpful for you? You said you needed it or you wanted it. How, sitting here as a, I'm not going to give your age away, but a middle-aged man, how do you think that period of time in therapy has helped you genuinely? Not in detail, but in kind of, how has it helped shape how you feel and how you act in life?
Yeah. I mean, I was going to answer it professionally, which is probably a dodge, isn't it? But I was going to say it has enabled me to see the value of that in a way that I think people who haven't had an experience of it might struggle with. So it was surprisingly effective. And I also see a lot of people now who've had an experience of therapy like that, which was sort of necessary but not sufficient. So they needed to tell that story, and then they're still stuck. So they've told that story, they understand where stuff comes from.
Yeah.
They're driving impatience, or they're fury when people seem not to listen to them, for example. But it doesn't necessarily unlock the next stage. So what do I do about this? How do I start behaving differently? And I suppose that would also be my answer to it. So I think I've got a reasonable sense of why I've ended up like I am. I am an impatient guy, and I do have those kind of deficits or challenges that I just mentioned. But the listening bit of it didn't do a great deal to help me. The insight itself did not really unlock the behavior. I was still an angry guy. I was still a guy who would be impulsive in certain situations. So, yep, I got where it comes from. It makes sense. It's less about me being broken or wrongly wired, more about me being, the product of a set of experiences. But now what? Now what do I do? And I think that skills-based stuff, skills-based anything is repetition, repetition, repetition of sort of small, almost micro skills that build. So, tennis is what I'm thinking of right now, but it could be anything, couldn't it? It could be musicianship. It could be learning a foreign language.
Yeah. Yeah.
Learning to do something differently, learning to deport yourself differently, learning to manage your emotions and regulate them in the moment, I think is probably in the end a skill.
Yeah, and I'd add on top of that the kind of mentalization stuff, which is fundamentally about, in couples work particularly, trying to genuinely understand what's going on for the other person, or make
Yeah, yeah,
hypotheses about what the other person might be thinking and feeling in the moment. A real, as
yeah,
to use the phrase you like, the kind of elite level skill, the ability and
yeah,
the moment to really be able to kind of go, how is what I'm saying and doing
yeah,
landing with my partner and potentially hurting them, and what do I do in that split
yeah,
second where I've got the potential to double down and make things worse, or I can stand back and try and reflect and try and change that record.
yeah. There's a nice clip on YouTube, I think it's probably it's Bateman and Fonagy's work, isn't it? And I think it's Bateman who is doing the role play, and the client says to him, something about what someone said at work, but that's just because she's such a bitch. And he says, it's called stop and stand, I think, in that mode of therapy. But he sort of stops it, says, hang on a minute, because it's kind of broken down. It's not clear to me. So sort of stand his ground. And it's quite a risk with somebody who wants to tell you that that person has been outrageous and, dismissive towards them. It doesn't follow on. For me, that doesn't follow on. She was just asking you to redo the work that you hadn't done correctly, or she was asking you to improve the timeliness of that piece of work next time you do it, and
Yeah.
it's that sort of thing, isn't it? Can you come out of your perspective? In a couple, I think it would be a different kind of example. Why do you not enjoy this? Why do you never want to go on holiday? Why do you never want to see
Yeah.
our friends, or your in-laws or whatever else? And then it's like, well, is it possible they're tired? Is it possible they don't enjoy that? Is it possible in that situation they don't always feel respected, or
Yeah, I like that example, partly because it makes me think of a therapy where the client who's saying she reacted like that because she's a bitch, if that doesn't get challenged or responded to in the moment,
yeah,
the therapy is kind of passively
yeah, yeah,
reinforcing
yeah,
a incorrect way of thinking, or a black and white way of thinking, or a cognitive bias of some sort that is probably detrimental to that person. They're probably walking around through their life making similar black and white
yeah,
assumptions about other people's behavior, including their partner at home, probably.
yeah,
And I
yeah, yeah,
think
yeah,
one part of the insight in therapy that you gain is that you're as fallible as any other human being, that you're as fallible to the same cognitive biases, you're as
yeah,
fallible as making broad conclusions about other people that are incorrect as much as any other person. And you've got to
yeah,
watch that throughout your life. You've got to try and watch that. And sometimes you can't. So having someone else, either your partner in a relationship or a therapist, kind of say, hang on a minute, are you sure
yeah,
about that? Do your feelings actually fit the facts here? Do your conclusions fit the
yeah.
facts? I think is enormously helpful.
Yeah, I agree. In Buddhism, they say something like, last year a foolish monk, this year no change. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? You just carry those delusions around, and you're either able to spot that they might be in operation, therefore catch them or do something about them or pause. But the actual eradication of the delusion or the bias or whatever, I think is pie in the sky, isn't it? The way I see things, and the
Yeah.
reason my wife doesn't see them the same is not because she is endlessly in error. It's
Yeah.
two
Yeah.
different people seeing
Yeah.
things differently, and
Yeah.
that feels, I mean, it's so absurd to call that a breakthrough or an insight, but I think it really is, and it helped in our relationship to see that pattern, to see that tendency and that pull. And I think it often does help in the couples I see. If you can name some of what's going on, or some of what appears to be going on, they can start to see that that is real for them, that that would have a connection to the past, is believable,
Yeah.
that they do overdo it. There is a template or a default that they go to. They do over index on feelings of safety or feelings of assertion or feelings of freedom or whatever else it might be. And their partner might just not be there with them. And it doesn't make them right or wrong. It doesn't really make anyone an ogre typically.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
I was thinking, I don't know what you'd say about this, but I think people have bad ideas about how to fix their problems as well when they come to therapy. So
Yeah.
they have often taken a stance that because they are not, getting on with people easily, or life's become difficult, they spend more time on their own, or they'll isolate, or they'll withdraw, or they won't go out for the work drinks, or they won't try and date again. So it's actually, it makes sense, doesn't it? You're protecting yourself, but it's a terrible idea if you're actually aiming for an outcome which is somewhere else. And I suppose I see that quite a lot. I'll keep myself safe from this situation by avoiding it is
Yeah.
entirely the wrong way to deal with anxiety. Actually, you need to expose yourself to that in a gradual way, but a fairly brisk way and a fairly painful way, truthfully, in order to see that it doesn't have as much power as you suppose. I think often people's ideas of how to fix a thing are just, often wrong, often just back to front wrong.
It was linked to what I was thinking about while you were talking earlier, which is that I think an awful lot of people are frustrated that they come to therapy wanting to change the feeling immediately. So anger, we were talking about earlier, they come saying, I want to feel less angry when my partner does X, Y, and Z. And my job is to be the annoying person to say, I'm less bothered about fixing that right now. And what we need to do is help you when you do get angry in those moments. What are you doing? How are you thinking? How are you behaving in those moments? And I think that's kind of linked to what you were saying, that when an anxious client comes to therapy, the last thing they want to be told is, I'm really sorry, you're just going to have to face your fears over an elongated period of time. And that's the best treatment for you. They want the reverse to be, they want to be told, there's a magic bullet where you can stay home and stay safe and it's all going to be fine. And we're just going to.
Or that if we just talk about it or talk around it, it will
just
fix
understand
itself.
it. It will just magically kind of, the unconscious is made conscious somehow, and just everything fixes itself in a magical way. And
so the other type of client I get, I don't know whether this is true for you, is someone who absolutely insists that they want a practical type of therapy. They've usually heard or read something about CBT or somebody has recommended it to them. And then when we start doing that, particularly when you do the B of CBT, the behavioral bit, where you say, right, let's run an experiment, let's agree to, to test this out. Let's agree to throw a few things at the wall.
Which can be really awful stuff, right? So if you've got social anxiety, it can be, I want you to approach a stranger on a tube train and ask for the time or something.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I don't care for that in my own life, but it is also the fix on those things, isn't it? And it's sort of, you go to the gym grumpy or resentful or moaning about the weather or how much it costs you each month, but you go, if I took exercise on the days where I felt perfectly motivated, not in the least bit tired, and felt I had a clear window to do it, I would go 2 or 3 times a year,
Yeah. Coming back to your story then, just for a moment, in terms of the bridge between insight and change, right? In your work that you did personally, or in your work with clients, what have we not talked about that you think is key to, particularly if you've got like a pessimistic partner in a couple you're working with, or someone who comes to therapy and says, I have been to various types of therapy that haven't been helpful. Things we haven't talked about that really benefit people, that speak to people?
Yeah, I mean, I guess some commentary up front, right? I use the line that you use a lot, which is you're only going to change by degrees. You're not going to change through 180. You're not going to change your partner through 180. So, let's work on that as a start point. This is more about the art of the possible than it is about transformative, radical change. I would say dialing it down matters a lot. Taking the heat out of a situation, it is super helpful. If you're being rude and the sentence could be ended, you bloody idiot, in brackets, changing the way you speak to one another will make a big difference. So it's not radical transformative change at that level of analysis, but actually the result it will get you might well be radical, transformative change. You might feel actually like that person is listening and respecting me. So the invitation to take the other person's perspective, I use sort of ABC. Can we acknowledge? Can we build on the point that's being made to me? And do I need to challenge back? But in that sort of chronological order. So I'm not challenging back straight. Oh no, let me correct you. It wasn't next Tuesday. It was, or getting into the detail of it again. It's like, okay, I'm trying to acknowledge what you're saying. Like, this maybe doesn't make so much sense to me in the first instance, but it's beginning to make a bit of sense from your perspective. Can you build on that? Can I try an example of what I think you're talking about, or a similar thing that happened? And then can I push back? Can I say, I don't think that happens all the time, or I don't think I'm the only one that does that, you know? So I think sometimes those tools can help quite a bit. They never sound like much, but then when we get into it in the session and we start using them, I think it does make a big difference. I don't think there's anything new under the sun in therapy, really. So I think some of those sorts of simple technique, skills-based approaches from within, you know, probably primarily cognitive behavioral therapy for me, but within those sort of problem-solving, solution-focused types of therapy can work surprisingly well. But I mean, same question to you. What do you find?
Yeah, I was thinking of one while you were talking, which is around the kind of modern idea of feelings and beliefs and thoughts should be expressed. And actually how a lot of work with clients of all sorts, a lot of our work is about just trying to find ways to ride the wave of the feeling before it dissipates, whatever that requires. And within a relationship, that being, you can be angry, you can be upset, you can be pissed off. Do you need to vocalize that? We shared a clip of Alain de Botton, didn't we, the other day, where he was talking about radical honesty again in a relationship, and how that can be a really sexy thing to do. And how one example he had was a feeling of, I really fancy someone in the office and I don't know what to do with that feeling. And listening to that, I'm thinking, why on earth would you talk about that with your partner? Like, there might be some relationships, of course, where that radical honesty is accepted and genuinely fun and whatever. But I think for the bulk of it, vocalizing everything,
I can't think of many, right? Not many people I know in my private life. I wouldn't welcome that being said to me. I can't think of anyone I've dated over the years or had a serious relationship with who would welcome that being said to them. And it just feels like absolute folly, truthfully.
Yeah. But I think in terms of the skill, that is an acceptance that there's a lot of individual work to do within a couple. Whereas I think couples often come to couples therapy thinking this is all about communication.
Sure.
A lot of work is about, no, you've got to catch that feeling within yourself and you've got to own it and take responsibility for it, and maybe find a different way of responding to it that possibly doesn't even involve your partner. Or if it does,
I agree.
It might be the next morning when you both had a good night's sleep and you actually can talk about it now in the kind of ABC type model that you were just talking about.
Yeah, I just don't see it as that important, really. So, I mean, I'm not suggesting that it's a terrible or dreadful thing. I mean, I don't take...
Which bit? Sorry, which bit?
The fancying somebody else at work. So it's not like, this is going to ruin your relationship, or this is a hurtful, dreadful thing to say. It just feels like it's your thing, right? So
it's just like verbal diarrhea almost.
Sure. It's incontinent, isn't it? It's emotional incontinence, I think, which is, just is something we're trying to grow out of, I think, as we grow up and grow into relationships. So it just doesn't seem terribly important or interesting either. If my wife said she worked with somebody or attended a conference with somebody who she found attractive, I'd be, well, I mean, why not, right? I mean, why would that be such a surprise? I imagine she is attractive to other people as well. So it just doesn't feel like a thing either. It's I found that a wild comment. And I suppose that does take us back a bit to, not only do people arrive in therapy having their own bad ideas about how to fix their problems or issues or challenges, there's also a lot of really bad ideas out there. And the person you mentioned is not at the extreme end of bad ideas. He is a very thoughtful, urbane guy, and he's presented on lots of credible
Yeah.
platforms. You know, I just don't find that or
He's not going to invite you on any just by you just trying to your baby.
did I not do enough to pull it
Just
back?
because I've thrown him under the bus doesn't mean you have to kind of keep up a flame
No, but I think that advice is truly dreadful, you know, and truly
yeah.
wrong-headed, and has nothing to do with how most people will, sort a relationship problem or stay together or have a good life.
Yeah, I guess there's something there. Let's not get too hung up on the
Sure.
point, but there's something about trying to get some sort of connection, isn't there? That
Yeah.
like
Definitely,
get
definitely
to
there is.
know the real me. We all walk around with masks on. Get to know the real me that he's trying to get at. I just think that
Yeah,
just the skill is knowing and thinking about how is
yeah,
this important. Number one,
sure.
is this going to land? Like,
Yeah,
is this something that is appropriate within the context of our
yeah,
relationship?
yeah,
And then there's the time and the place point, isn't there? Like, is now the right time to deliver this?
yeah,
I
yeah,
think number one rarely gets asked these days,
yeah,
particularly by couples in crisis. Like,
yeah,
does this need to be raised right now, or do I just need
yeah,
to ride the wave of the feeling,
yeah.
find a way of dealing with it, and wake up in a week's time and see if it's still important?
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Some of what we're saying, even in couples therapy, is that you're trying to regulate your own stuff, aren't you? You're trying to
Yes,
sort yourself out.
exactly,
This isn't all happening
exactly.
between you. Some of it is just you taking responsibility. You
Yeah,
don't feel like visiting the in-laws because you've had a heck of a week.
yeah,
Go visit them anyway, right? You've got some obligations there, and we're not going to wish those away. And I don't really personally want to talk around that with anybody. If there's disrespect and you'd like your partner to have a word with somebody in their family and reset the manner in which they greet you, or you know they disparage your work or whatever else, fine, right? But I'm not going, you know, it's too difficult for me, or not after this week, that I think is, I
yeah.
can't see that really ever being helpful. And me being really, really, really honest and disclosing about how I feel about every one of your extended family members, I can't see that being terrifically helpful either.
But before we wrap up, you've used the term emotional regulation a few times. What do we actually mean? What kind of helps in the moment? Someone's feeling furious, someone's feeling really upset by something. What does
Yeah.
it really mean? I mean, it just means practically trying to find a way to cope, doesn't it? In a variety of different ways. And over time, take it down from a 9 or a 10 out of 10 more to a 5 or 6 out of 10, whatever ways you can.
Yeah, something about pausing in the moment, isn't there, if you can? Something about buying yourself time. I suspect you and I have not got the same sort of, I feel myself more with a hair trigger, you know, more inclined to be impulsive in those situations. So maybe this isn't as relevant for you, or maybe you should say what you do. But for me, there's trying to buy a little bit of a gap, you know, a pause, a moment where I'm not immediately shooting back. So, and sometimes in a relationship or couples that I'm seeing, that would be like, leave the house, you know, it's
Yeah,
gotten too much for you.
yeah,
So go. Your pause is not just a breath or a, you know, moment. It's I'm going to have to leave and come back. We're going to
yeah.
have to pause for 20 minutes before I can talk about this again. And that would be so much better. Just holding the position there would be so much better than a flaming row where each of you are unkind about the other or
I agree.
really get into it. That I think is really destructive. So I think there's an attempt to pause or to just hold it so that you can plan and act. You can say something which is I don't know, which takes you out of that impulse to strike back.
Yeah, good.
You feel any of that, or is that not really a big deal for you?
Well, on a personal level.
Yeah.
So mine is less a kind of hair trigger towards others and more a kind of hair trigger towards myself. Kind
Mm,
of, you know, if something
yeah.
frustrating in life comes up,
Yeah.
wanting to turn that into very harsh negative thoughts
Yeah.
internally or take it out on the environment around me. So the kind of classic kind
Yeah.
of something drops out of the fridge and like the
Yeah.
fridge door gets a punch rather and having to kind of school myself and say, what on earth are you doing? Like, it's just a jar of pickles, no one cares, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter. Just taking that beat before you actually do the act, because I
Yeah.
do think there's something, isn't there, about just reinforcing that stuff over time.
Sure. Absolutely. You get good at what you practice, don't you?
You
Which
get
is
good
the
at what
which
you
is
practice.
the bad idea that angry people have, and the stupid idea that you punch a cushion. Like if you're an angry person, you've ever
Yeah,
tried that. It is
exactly,
not doing what people
exactly.
promise you it will
Yeah,
do. You know?
yeah. So even that there is a kind maybe though a kind of nuance point there though, which is if you are furious with your partner, going into the next room and kind of having a scream to yourself into a
Yeah.
cushion and then taking a breath and going back to them probably is effective. But I think your point is,
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're just another pod, isn't it? But I think it can also be frightening and it can rock people
yeah,
back a bit
sure,
and
yeah,
all of
yeah,
those
yeah,
sorts of
yeah,
things. And it's like,
yeah,
you're probably at a less conscious level. We didn't talk about psychoanalysis, did we, tonight? At a less conscious level, you are,
kind of,
there is some leakage of behavior there, isn't there? You are telling somebody else that you are white hot angry and that you are out of
yeah,
control at that point. And I think
yeah,
some of what I'm trying to do is like, they
yeah,
don't need to know that. They don't need to know
yeah,
you fancy at work, and they don't need to
yeah,
know that you're furious in that moment. Go
yeah,
deal with that because you're no use to them. We don't go on a first date furious. We don't show people, as we're beginning to build a relationship over the first few weeks and months, that we're a furious person.
yeah, yeah,
There's something about, being your best self is good advice when you start dating, when you get someone you really like in order to keep them. And then when you propose a marriage or, a set of financial arrangements to keep you together for a few years, you're trying to be your best self, aren't you? And I think that's some of what we're railing against when people say be yourself or take time for self-care or those sorts of
yeah.
things. But some of your job is to
Yeah, if you can't accept me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my
have a
best. I
bet.
think if there's one statement in the modern life I fundamentally disagree with, it's that
Yeah.
one. It's don't be your
Yeah.
worst self in front of your partner. They don't deserve it. Yeah, try
Yeah.
to take the edges off it.
The
And
pause is the pause is getting you to trying to choose your act on your values, isn't it? Or do
yes,
something which is
definitely,
more than in
definitely,
the immediate. Like you might even be justified in being angry,
totally,
hitting back,
totally.
but you're trying
Yeah,
to do something which is more like about your longer term interest than the short term urge to
yeah,
whatever it is.
yeah, yeah. And you
And I
can,
think it's really hard as well. That's what I would say about it. I find those things, like any of those sort of skills, actually incredibly difficult
yeah,
to do. You've got to do them over and over and over again. But it is a little bit like for those of us who didn't learn a very effective language for dealing with our feelings and emotions and our problematic thoughts and weird ways of seeing the world when we were young. I would say the best analogy is you're learning a new language and you do
mm,
that slowly and over time. And it's a bit
mm,
stuttering at first, I guess. Where I just wanted to finish up by
mm,
emphasizing something you've already said, but I think is worth repeating. Where people get stuck, I think, is thinking that emotional regulation means feeling better quickly.
mm,
And it doesn't. It means behaving better while you're still feeling
mm.
really bad.
And hoping that over time
Yeah.
that takes the edge off the initial feeling. That's the
And it will, but you're
yeah,
going to have to find that out from
yeah,
experimental data. You're going to have
absolutely.
to experience that. You're going to have to take that on trust. And I suppose that is quite a nice route back to the beginning because I think that is something you can tell people because you know that
Yep,
in your own life and you see that time and time again with the
yep,
people who you're working with. And you know that way better than somebody who codes for a living or
yep,
works in a school or,
yep.
whatever else.
Yeah, it builds that trust, doesn't it? That you know what you're doing, that they can trust that if they do the difficult things that you're asking them to do, they will over time get better. And they can't do that on their own.
No, no. I think you just wouldn't know
Yeah, exactly.
some of that
Yeah,
stuff. And I think sometimes you need encouragement to do
yeah,
those things. It's
yeah,
not quite the same, is it? But we go to an accountant for accountancy advice, right? We go to the lawyer for a legal input. We know broadly, what we want to do and how we might transact it. And it won't be a million miles from that, but there will be bits within that that need to be sequenced or done in a particular way, or that you would overlook or simply not know about. And that, I think, there is a bit of expertise there. I think therapists fight shy of saying that sometimes, and I'm sufficiently immodest to disagree.
Alan de Patton is still not going to invite you on his podcast, Matt.
No, and I don't think anyone's coming to see you after you admit you punched the fridge.
20 years ago.
All
All
right,
right.
nice to see you.
Bye.
Bye.